Thank you everybody for joining us today on Facebook Live. We are so thrilled to have a very important topic addressed today about social and emotional learning and students with learning differences in regards to depression and anxiety. We're very lucky that with us today, we've got Dr. Cristina Sevadjian, and we also have Jessie Skinner from Sparrow House Counseling. And we're so thrilled. They have 15 years of experience, and Cristina also does assessments of students with learning differences. And she's done a lot of treatment of students with learning differences, dyslexia, ADHD, etc., and on social emotional learning and all kinds of therapy. And Jessie Skinner has also been in the practice for over 15 years. She's a licensed professional counselor and supervisor. She also does play therapy of students with learning differences and of all ages. So we're so thrilled to have them here today. And I was going to let you guys also do a little bit of an intro about yourselves and share a little bit about what we were going to be discussing today.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. So I'm Dr. Cristina Sevadjian. You did a great introduction. So I love working with children and teenagers and parents. People laugh sometimes at how much I enjoy working with teenagers. So as does Jessie. Our practice is Sparrow House Counseling. So we're part of a specific child and adolescent team. There's 12 of us on that team where we just work with kids and adolescents and parents. And then our practice in general is a full service practice that treats a variety of issues that adults have too: marriage, addiction, all types of anxiety, depression, all types of things.
That's great. What about you, Jessie?
I've been with Sparrow House for, I think, 7 years, a little over 7 years. And I work with primarily families and kids and teens. Like Cristina said, I love teens. They're just a lot of fun, and they have no problem telling you what they really think, which is a fun thing to get to work with.
Yes, I'm learning that myself. I've got a 13-year-old, so he's almost 14. I'm learning that myself. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, and I know tonight we really wanted to talk about children with learning differences. Obviously, as people know, more prone to anxiety and then sometimes depression, but particularly anxiety. And so we wanted to help the people with us that are viewing kind of understand how do I even know as a parent when my child might be struggling with social emotional health related issues, and then what are some things I might do, some things that just that a parent can do, what are the right things to do. We get asked that question a lot. And then when might we need to seek some professional attention for these issues?
Absolutely.
So Jessie and I are going to kind of start talking a little bit about anxiety first, if that sounds good.
Sounds great to me.
So Jessie, okay, so we get parents in every week. We all meet with parents once a week, new parents to the practice. And one of the big kind of questions that they present to us is sort of like, we're not really sure, is this typical? Is this not typical when it comes to worries? Because what we know is that kids there are very age appropriate, normal worries. So Jessie, you want to just kind of talk a little bit about what are some of the typical worries that we see a lot in kids and adolescents?
Yeah, we see a lot of the same worries that maybe we would worry about as adults. I think it goes without saying that this past year has added several typical worries just regarding health and things like that. But we see kids worry a lot about the health of their family, of their friends, lots of social worries. Do my friends like me? Am I normal? That's a big one for a lot of kids. Schoolwork, am I measuring up? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Are other people thinking that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do? For younger kids, you often see worries about storms or maybe scary animals, dogs. I've had several kids be scared of dogs or getting
clowns sick. Jessie, we hear a lot of clowns,
which I understand that one.
Yes,
it ruined it for all of us.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we see in teens is a lot related to social media, right? Like they're much more, I really can't imagine being a teenager right now. I spend as much time with them as I possibly can because I love them so much. But the amount that they not only, I just had to maybe go to school on homecoming day and be like, yeah, I'm not going to homecoming. I'm not wearing my mom. This is sad. This isn't that much fun. But they've also got to see all of it on social media. And even, kids just not being very nice and sending pictures of like via Snapchat, like, look, we're all hanging out and you're not here.
Yeah.
So those are just kind of typical. We work with, in our office, really high performing families and really high performing teenagers. Mm-hmm. So I talk a lot about how our kids are more perfectionistic. They're the kids that are getting into great universities, that are excelling in sports, but sometimes that comes at a price anxiety wise. And so we really help them get to work through that and help families work through that. So those are kind of some of the typical worries, very age appropriate. What we know is we used to think, when Jessie and I were growing up in the 80s, they did not know that children or adolescents could really be anxious. It was thought to be an adult kind of disease. Mm-hmm. Now what we understand is no, kids and adolescents can be anxious. We can see anxiety in kids as young as 2 or 3. And we actually have a great preschool program, like treatment program, to help at that age, at that young age, which is really good because sometimes you can early intervention in our field is very important as well.
Yeah.
So a lot of questions I think we get is from parents is like, okay, well, I understand my child's worrying. What do I do about that? How do I address these worries? So Jessie, you want to talk a little bit about
when does it cross that line? I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
So you're looking for, how do I meet my child where they are? And so if your child is really worried about things and you're hearing a lot of these normal things, especially after this year, first you really want to validate. And that's something that I think Cristina and I are doing all day, is just helping people understand some of these things. It makes sense. I understand why you're feeling that way. Even those things that maybe I don't fear. Yes, I could see why you'd be really scared of that storm, because it makes really loud sounds and that's going to really be startling. And so really helping kids to hear not just that they are bad and they shouldn't feel that way, but that it makes sense. And if you think about it as adults, oftentimes if someone just says, hey, it's okay, I get it, you're not crazy, I can let that moment go and then I'm done. Mm-hmm. Now, anxiety is a little bit different than that, but validating that and then really reminding kids. Oh, go ahead, Cristina.
Oh, Jessie, I was going to say one other thing about the validation. I think where this gets tricky for parents, I think that we're okay at validating that a storm can be scary or that dog was scary. I think when we get into the teen years, as people, it gets really hard for us to hear, our middle schoolers say, I don't think anybody likes me. No one talked to me at lunch. And I think immediate parent reaction and my reaction too, even when I'm not their parent, is to be like, no, you're wonderful. You're so amazing. I'm going to list 20 of your best qualities and try to convince them, rather than be like, man, that must have been really hard to sit there at lunch and not have anybody talk to you. I'm sorry, that is sad.
Yeah. And also the other thing with that too, is I feel like sometimes when that validation comes from mom, it has zero credibility. It's like, you're the one person's like, no, you're great. Like, don't worry about it. It's all them. It's not you. It's like, well, you're my mom. You have to say that. There's some of that too sometimes.
There's that. And I think a lot of times it's hard for us because we feel sad, right? We feel their feelings, and at such a greater level as a parent. I think the only thing worse than going through something hard yourself is watching your child like struggle through it. And I just use middle school because middle school is a hard time for every kiddo. Yeah. And so that validation is really important. And I'm a big fix-it person. So I really have to watch that I'm not giving them the 20 best strategies to make friends at lunch, because that's not what they really need. I tell most of my parents, your child is super bright and actually a really great problem solver. Mm-hmm. What they really need is to hear from you, man, that is so hard. I'm really sorry. That was probably really lonely.
That's so good. I think that, like you said, just showing that empathy is important. But as a mom, you do want to fix it. So it is hard. I have a friend that mentioned to me the other day that her middle schooler has been sitting alone at lunch. And as a mom, she's just been crushed about it, that she's kind of like, what do I do? Do I intervene? Do I what do you do when your kid's in middle school? Or you don't really call anybody, but what do you tell your kid? And so that's hard stuff.
It is hard stuff. And Heather, let me just share this story just to encourage those parents out there.
Uh-huh.
So I moved in 7th grade, not a very easy time to move, brand new student. And I ate in the bathroom the first 3 days of school because I just did not know who to eat with, how to do that. And I just needed to kind of figure it out a little bit. What I can say is as an adult, I have a lot of friends. And so just to kind of remember in these hard moments, for yourself, not for your kids, you would never say to them oh, you'll be fine, but for yourself to say, they'll be fine. Some of the struggle builds this grit and resilience that we've kind of been talking around and tossing around during this COVID period. But Jessie, I'll let you keep going. I know you've got more really good tips for parents.
One of the things I think is really helpful in this validation piece as an adult talking to a kid is noticing how many words you're using. If you're talking longer than about a minute, you've gone into lecture fix-it mode.
Oh.
So that's kind of a good thing. And really, honestly, if we think back to when we were in those younger years, we shut down. I don't care about what you're saying anymore. You've kind of gone talking. My eyes have glazed over. And so I tell parents all the time, sometimes paying attention to being able to walk by and throw the information out and just keep going. And if the kid picks it up and keeps the conversation going, great. Mm-hmm. But if they let it go, I have kids come sit with me all the time and they're like, yeah, my mom said this. And the parents have told me, there's no way they heard me say that. There's no way my kid was listening. And I'm like, your kid said verbatim what you said. Your kid absolutely heard that. And so that's just a great encouragement, I think, that they're not going to listen to the lecture, but these validation moments where you just really reflect back what they're feeling are so meaningful. Because what Cristina said, they know a lot of times they know exactly what to do. They just don't want to, or they want you to tell them that it's okay that they're sad.
Yeah.
Those are such good points. And I think another thing is people in general, but kids especially, in order to build confidence, they have to go through and have these experiences and have some what I call wins. Mm-hmm. And I talk to parents a lot about that. I was like, yeah, right now it just sounds like your child's not having very many wins. Yeah. So for kids that are overall doing pretty well, a really great way to address their fears with them is to bring up those wins. Well, remember when you were a little bit worried about going to, day camp in the city because you didn't know anybody because you were going a different day than your friends were going. And then remember by the end of camp that day, you made 2 new friends. That was awesome. And you were so proud of yourself. I wonder if this situation is a little like that. So bringing up a past success can really help them kind of remember and kind of build up that confidence.
And what are you seeing some of this with kids with dyslexia and ADHD? And is it kind of different or
they have a lot less wins is what I'd say at school. Because what I liken it to is if you, and I mean this in a really compassionate way. Sure. If you're a person and you went to work every day and you kind of thought, I'm not that great at this job. This job is really hard for me. There's aspects of it that really don't fit with my strengths. I'm more creative or I'm better at math. Mm-hmm. Then you can see that would be a really hard day for you. So I feel like my kids with ADHD and dyslexia, it's really hard because those things really impact learning. And a lot of our schools, that aren't specialized are more just kind of public schools or private or some private schools that are not learning disability schools. They're not always teaching in a way that's really sometimes meaningful to the student. And so that student really doesn't have as many wins. And so it's kind of for parents, one thing to do is figure out some ways to create some wins. If they're good at art, let's do art. If they're good at soccer, let's make sure we're not having dyslexia intervention when they could be playing soccer. Just some things like that to kind of build in some of those wins.
That's so good. And I love what you're saying, because I feel like sometimes it's easy to spend time after school on trying to fix your child, but trying to have those areas where they can shine and focus on their strengths is important. I do have a parent that sent a question just now. What do you say to your child if they say they're stupid? How do you handle that?
Yeah, so I want to kind of know a little bit about where that's coming from. So if it's coming, I'm going to assume from your group that it's coming from a learning disability.
Yes, probably. Or ADHD, what have you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I would say, I understand that school feels really, really hard for you because it is, right? We all know it is for them. And I know that every day you get up and you go, and it's really hard. And I'm so proud of you for that. And what we know, and this is what we kind of talk about, is that your brain works a little differently. And I know that sometimes you probably feel dumb because your brain does work differently. And then you can go, if they're in a place, this is where there's kind of a fork in the conversation, that might really be all they can do.
Yes.
Right? They're emotional, they're crying,
Mm-hmm.
they can't read their book tonight, they're supposed to have it finished, right? Like you might be in one of those moments, and that's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a moment where they can maybe hear a little bit more, you can remind them, especially if you've done testing, remember what we learned about your brain. We learned your brain does this really, really well, but this makes your brain really, really tired. Reading makes your brain really, really tired.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of helping, if you can, insert some truth if they're not kind of in a really emotional moment. If it's really emotional, I just really, again, just kind of empathize with that. And I would say feel stupid,
Mm-hmm.
take it out of R. So I know that's just a slight shift, but that feels different, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels hard. You feel stupid, right? Rather than I am. I wouldn't repeat back the same thing like, yes, you're stupid, right? That's not a good validation moment, but just saying, I know school feels really hard for you. You just feel dumb sometimes when you're there.
That's really good. That's really good advice. And as people are watching this, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the comments and we'll be bringing them up. You guys can go ahead on.
Yeah. Just as we're talking about worries, really a lot of times with parents, I want to bring this one up because I feel like this is a thing we see a lot. We see parents when a child gets worried about something, a lot of times what they'll do is what I call facilitating the worry. Is what they'll do is they'll say, oh, you're worried about going to a new friend's house. Well, we don't have to do that. Right. So they've just facilitated the fear and then reinforced, oh, this really is a dangerous situation. Going to your friend's house who we know really well and we know that they're a good family is really too much for you and you can't do it.
Oh,
right? So sometimes it's more, hey, how could we start? Could I walk up to the door with you? Do you want me to stay and talk to the mom for a while and then I'll leave? But to help move them towards doing some of the things that at first they're a little bit afraid of.
I love that. I had a therapist recommend that for one of my children. My youngest has social anxiety, and sometimes going to birthday parties was overwhelming for her when she would get there. And so he said, instead of telling her, hey, let's not go, tell her, let's just stay for 15 minutes. And then after 15 minutes, if she's rocking it out and things are going well, then you can stay longer. But you tell the host in advance that, hey, we may not be able to stay the whole time. It's nothing personal, but she's kind of working through some social anxiety. But by doing that 15-minute thing, it kind of gave her that sense of, well, if I need to abort mission, I can, but I'm going to at least try it. And that's kind of how we've done a lot of things is let's just try it and let's just see how it goes. And then, the whole thumbs up, thumbs down thing. There was a couple of times at swim lessons where she's going like this. Like, get me out of here. But I think it was cool because it made her feel empowered. And for me as a mom, you don't want to take a kid that's upset to a birthday, but you also don't want her to never go to social events. And that did kind of help her get through that hump.
Yeah. And that's okay. And sometimes, they've already done a lot of hard stuff. They have dyslexia. They've already done dyslexia intervention, during the day. They've done homework. They're kind of done. Yeah. And that's okay. It's just that I see that pattern kind of return where parents not intentionally have facilitated the anxiety, not help support their child. So those are really different. So I usually draw that and kind of go back to parents with, well, do you think in that moment you were facilitating the anxiety or you were supporting Sarah? I want you to support Sarah. And they're like, oh man, I didn't think about it, but you're right. I think I was facilitating the anxiety, which I didn't want to do that. So that's kind of a little tip in there. And then just a word about this too. I think, kids watch us and how we cope with things as adults. And so I think that's really important. I'm going to let Jessie talk about that a little more because I think this is a really important point.
So yeah, your kids are always watching. We all know that because they know things, they absorb information that you had no idea that they had any information about. And so a lot of things that parents are doing, what we see is oftentimes when kids come in with this very specific fear, mom or dad comes in and they're like, oh yeah, I get really nervous during storms too. Their whole lives I've talked about it, things like that. If we think about it, anxiety is so contagious. If I'm in the room with somebody who's really amped up, I get amped up. And so your kids do that with you because they're so connected with you that they're going to match you just because you guys have such a deep connection. And so for parents, one of the biggest things you can do to support your kids is just to take care of yourself. And so noticing, hey, what do I need to do for my anxiety? For a lot of parents, that's taking time out for exercising or spending time with friends, things like that. And oftentimes, especially with some of these older kids, really highlighting, hey, I'm going to go on a walk because that makes me feel better. That helps calm down my nerves. I've noticed that I've been sitting inside for a whole week and that has made me feel a little more jittery than usual. So I'm going to go on a walk. Yeah. And really helping kids to see that connection that you make, because they're watching us all day, every day to figure out how to be in this world. That's a great way to just teach them without the lecture, because they shut us down on those moments.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, but I had a mom of like more of a 20s kind of kiddo, and she was calling me a lot. And my daughter has an alcohol problem. She drinks to cope. And I, kind of talked to her and I was like, hey, your mom says you really drink to kind of cope with your feelings. And she notices that. And she's like, well, that's what my mom does. You probably should talk to her too. Right. And I say that just because this year with COVID, I think a lot of us are not really coping at our best, but just a reminder to kind of look at that. And are there some small changes, that we can all make? I know my phone, I've been like, I've got to get it out of the way, set it up on a counter, because otherwise I will find myself on it doing nothing, just goofing around. And that's not a good way to cope with whatever's going on. So those are, I think that coping one, we really wanted to highlight that. I do want to talk for a second about, we're talking about anxiety and it's when should I be worried? Like as a parent, when has this kind of raised to the level of, it seems like we need to get some professional help here. It seems like we've done sort of the tips and tricks and read the books and the Sissy Golf book, and we've done all the things, right? And it just doesn't seem to be cutting it. Mm-hmm. And so if you notice that your child is there are particular things that they are consistently avoiding, having a lot of anxiety about. So, never want to go to birthday parties, don't want to have play dates with friends, having trouble getting to school. I know that sounds obvious, but that's a big one, especially with kids with learning disabilities, right? Because there can just be a lot of anxiety around just even going to school. Mm-hmm. If you're noticing grades going down, not because we're really hard on kids about grades, but just like, you're like, wow, your grades in every class have dropped a letter grade. Mm-hmm. That's something to really take notice of. Again, not about performance, but just that's telling us something. It's not like your grade just went down in math because you had a hard test. Difficulties with, just being able to focus in on things. I don't mean from an ADHD perspective, but just like a kiddo who normally can focus pretty well is kind of just seems very like thinking about their own thoughts in their head, if you know what I mean. I call it busy brain, but there's just a lot going on up there. And then, refusal to go to school, like we talked about. And then like just kind of frequent worries. And it feels like what I tell parents is that they've gotten on the worry train, it's left the station and we can't get it to turn around. Mm-hmm. So I have worked with kids before and had family members before where kids really struggle with anxiety, can't go to bed. It's taking an hour and a half. Like mom and dad have to like lay down in the room in bed with them, right? That kind of thing. The hand wringing that sometimes comes up, like, I just can't do this today. Any changes like, in eating, appetite, things like that. Those are signs that, hey, this may be something that we really need to get professionals to address. And, another thing I encourage parents with, talking to your pediatrician can be really helpful because they do have some mental health training. And we do, parent consultations all the time. And sometimes our recommendation is, hey, here are the things to look for in your child and watch. Mm-hmm. You may not need it right now, but it may be something, here are the things to look for later. So I think, an assessment by a trained professional is always helpful if you're thinking about that. I think with anxiety too, just a word out there, is it goes up and down. So I think what happens is it takes sometimes kids a long time to get treatment because the anxiety goes down and parents go, oh, good, they're okay. And everyone wants to think their child's doing okay, right? And so we'll get calls sometimes at the height of the anxiety. And then when they come in, they're like, well, maybe we don't need to be here.
Yep.
And we kind of talk about, okay, what to look for. And by the way, anxiety goes up and comes down. That's part of what it does.
Yes.
So yeah. Anything you'd add, Jessie, about when to seek out some professional assistance?
I think parents, oftentimes when we see them that first time, one of the things that I feel like I hear most weeks when I talk to new parents coming into the practice is, we've been thinking about this for months or maybe a year or a couple years, and it just always felt like we never had time or things like that. Parents usually have some kind of gut sense that I do need to just talk to somebody to get this checked. And so if that kicks in, like Cristina said, talk with a pediatrician, you have all of those appointments, the yearly appointments, things like that, because early intervention really is going to be so much more helpful. There are a lot of times that we work with kids when they're older and we will have the conversation, man, I wish we could have started this 3-4 years ago, because I think we really could have skipped some of this, because one of the things we talk about with kids where it's different than us as adults is that they're on a developmental track.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been kind of in the same spot for a while. I don't want to use years because that'll make me sad, but kids, every year they've got to be making these gains. And if they're refusing to go to school or refusing to spend time with friends or not sleeping, we're having some really big breaks from where they need to be going developmentally. And so the sooner you talk to somebody, the better, because you'll either hear, hey, your kid's doing okay, here's some things to look for, or I'm so glad you came in, let's get started on some treatment.
I agree 100%. And I feel like sometimes, as parents, there's a little bit of denial going on. And I think when in doubt, check it out. And, it's better to rule things out if there's something going on with your child than to guess or hope your way through it, that it's going to be okay. It's better to just get it checked out by somebody else. And it's always good to get another set of eyes on our children, because it's easy to overlook things, even with speech issues. I've had kids who've had speech issues that are my own child, but I don't know that they need speech intervention because I hear them talking every day. And to me, it just seems normal. And I think if you compare that to some of these other things, it's easy to go, well, that's kind of their normal. And it's like, well, is it really normal? Is it really okay to have these level of challenges? Now, we do have one parent that is bringing up a topic regarding virtual schooling. She has a child who's been in virtual schooling during COVID, and now they're afraid to go to middle school. So I'm assuming that they must be like in 5th grade or 6th grade, about to go on to middle school. They've been doing virtual learning, and now they're afraid to take this next leap into middle school. What advice do you have for someone that's dealing with that?
Yeah, so I would also say is those transitional grades bring up more anxiety, which is totally normal. I really think that's, and to really just tell kids, like, I know it does seem like a big jump or a big step, right? To validate that feeling. The next thing I would do is, if right, this school is a good place, it's a safe place, like we feel good about the school, we don't have any reservations about the school, then it's just helping them kind of get used to going. So can you go visit the school? Can you talk to the school counselor? Can you talk to the school counselor about schedules and stuff like that? And even at public schools, there's a lot of great school counselors that will really, if you're a parent and you say, hey, we really need some help with this, they're going to try to help you as best they can. Some schools have a little bit of a here, come for a week and do a little camp before school. These are public schools that have this, so that you can kind of get used to the new school. Or maybe there's a day when all the kids go over. And so encourage them, to do that. I think that's a big part, is just helping them get kind of warmed up to the idea. I think we are going to see that though, where they've now been out of school for so long. And what we know is that anxiety builds up about things over time. So especially for things like school, when kids are refusing to go to school, my advice to parents is always try to get them back in as quickly as you can, because that anxiety is just building and it just makes it harder over time.
That makes a lot of sense.
One thing that can be helpful, especially with these transitions, is, most of us plan for new events by playing it through in our head before we do it. And so talking through, okay, what do you think middle school is going to look like? What do you think the first day will look like? Remember how we took that tour? You're going to walk through that door. they're going to give you a locker or maybe a cubby, and you're going to go there first, kind of walking through. And that's where the school counselor can be a really big help. Hey, what is that day going to look like? What do you need to feel successful in that day? Who are your friends who you're excited to see? Kind of walking through that mental picture. What are you expecting? And a lot of times with parents, I really recommend them leaning back. Parents lean back and let your kid be the one who gives most of the information, because we just want to jump in and fix it. That's the theme, is all that. That's all we want to do. But get really curious and just ask lots of questions. Hey, what do you think would happen next? What do you think is going to happen at lunch? And kind of just see what their fears are, because even if they don't come up to a solution on their own with their fears, then you actually know what you're intervening with. Because a lot of times we jump in and we hear, oh, you're just scared because it's a new place. It's going to be fine. Everybody else is new too. And you move on, and they're thinking, no, I'm really worried because the last time I saw that one friend, we got in a fight.
Yeah.
And so you get to learn a little bit more.
Very good. I love what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense. I've got somebody else who has written a question, and they're saying they have a high schooler who seems to have ADHD and paralysis regarding homework and cleaning an extremely messy room. Any suggestions on how a parent can nudge them without making them do it?
For ADHD, what we kind of know from research is a lot of kids struggle with internal motivation. It's part of dopamine in the brain not getting to the right place to motivate them. So we know that that motivation issue is actually a real brain-based thing with ADHD. So sometimes what we have to do is give them external incentives. And external incentives are like, if you clean your room, or if you maintain certain grades, then here's the reward. What it helps them do is zero in and kind of build their motivation towards that reward. And the reward can be a lot of things. It's usually whatever currency motivates them. So different kids have different currency. That's what I say. For some kids, it's like, baseball cards, right? They want certain baseball cards. Other kids, it's getting to go. If I do it X amount of times, I get to go to Dave & Buster's with my friends. So finding what their currency is, I think, can be really helpful. Now, some parents will say to me, well, that sounds like a bribe, Dr. Sevadjian. Do you like to bribe children? And what I say to them is, do you go to work for free? Do you just show up at your job because, it's a great place to be and that's what you feel like doing every day? And the answer is usually, no, I don't. Mm-hmm. Okay, so same thing. And now if kids are already external, or if they're already motivated, we don't need to do things like this. That can take away from that motivation. That's what we know from the research. But with our ADHD kids, it's really that they're probably not that motivated to do some of these things that they're like, seems really boring. I'm not really into it. It's not on my priority list. The reward helps get that onto the priority list.
I love it. Makes total sense to me. I have somebody else who's written another question. They said they have a high school student in public school and have found that meeting with the diagnostician has been very encouraging and helpful. I don't know if this is a question, but I guess that having a good connection with the diagnostician has been helpful. Any advice maybe or additional support for how parents can continue a good vibe and good connection with their school and their diagnostician?
So I'm not sure exactly. The diagnostician in public schools usually does testing for learning disabilities. That's usually their role. So I'm not sure if maybe that's the school counselor, or if really this kid, really found a great relationship with that diagnostician and then kind of checks in with them. And so what I want to encourage everybody with is, especially kids with learning disabilities and ADHD, having some adults at the school that they really can connect with is really, really important. Mm-hmm. So, any adult there, because then they've got one person they can go to. I'm so sorry. I think I'm going to turn my notifications off. I just noticed they were on, but hopefully that is helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, to build on that, we have research that shows if the more adults kids have in their lives who they know care, the better. Mm-hmm. And so as many people who your kid might connect with at school, that's so helpful.
That's really good. So if y'all have any more tips, I know that we've having somebody else. Somebody else was just saying that the diagnostician has a great handle and resources available for parents. So that's good. So they're just saying that the school diagnosticians can be a great resource.
Yeah, especially for dyslexia, because they're usually on the front lines of kind of helping with that. So that, yes, that's really great. And then school counselors often help with putting those 504 plans in place. So yes, absolutely. A couple of questions we kind of get is a lot of parents, I think part of the reason for that hesitation, like we were talking about, to kind of talk to somebody about their child's anxiety or try to figure out what to do, is because I think parents feel like I must be doing something wrong as a parent if this is going on with my child. Like if they're having a social emotional struggle, it must mean something bad about me. I don't find that parents tend to feel that way about dyslexia. They're not like, oh, they have dyslexia. We know it's genetic, but they usually kind of give themselves a break on that because they were like, yeah, I didn't really control that they inherited the dyslexia gene. But for more social emotional things, I think they feel different. We think about them differently. And so one of the things I talk to parents about is, if you would take your child to the eye doctor to get their eyes checked out, maybe there's something wrong with their eyes, maybe there's not. But right, like it's the same kind of thing. If they have a math issue, a reading issue, you're going to get them intervention. This is exactly the same, although it does feel differently. But what I tell parents is most of our social emotional issues are also inherited, meaning families, usually mom and dad say somebody struggles with anxiety, somebody struggles with depression, somebody struggling with ADHD. So that's been passed down as well. So there's a huge genetic component. There's personality kind of components. There's brain chemistry. And I think a big one right now that we're seeing is with COVID happening, right? We all have this huge stressor in our life. So if you have any of this predisposition, what we know is then huge stressors can really make those predispositions come out more. So that's kind of why you're hearing more and talking more about kind of emotional well-being in our students right now.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
Well, I know we probably need to wrap up pretty soon here. And I know we didn't get to depression. So I feel like maybe we'll get a chance to come back sometime and we can kind of hit on that more. But are there any other questions, or as you've been listening, Heather, do you have any other questions for us?
Well, I think one question that I have is, if you have a teen that's, showing some of the issues with anxiety, and the therapy is usually something they should get checked out. When does a parent ever entertain the idea of medication, and how often are you seeing that medication ends up being a necessary? How do you determine when medicine might be helpful for a child that's struggling?
Yeah. So I want to back up a little bit because you reminded me of something really important. So anxiety disorders are highly treatable in children, adolescents, and adults. We actually have lots of good research-based interventions. What that means, a research-based intervention means it's gone through a lot of really stringent clinical trials, and we know that it's effective. So, and we have actually lots of different evidence-based treatments for that. So I think that's a really important thing, because I a lot of times when parents come to me, they think therapy is their child just like chatting with me on the couch, and it's not. It's the development of skills and tools and helping them work through and face their fears. So we have lots of things that we can do with kids and lots of tools. So I just wanted to put that out there. A lot of parents feel, I would say, better at starting off maybe seeing somebody like me or Jessie, because it seems a little less invasive than going to medication. Oh, yeah. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll kind of say from the start, kind of depending on what the parents are saying, hey, we can try these interventions. And there's a portion of kids that do really well just with our psychological research-based interventions. They do awesome. Anxiety really improves. It's great. We know there's a portion of kids that need the combination treatment. And that's actually been very well studied, where there's medication and our evidence-based treatments. Same thing with the medication. We actually know really well, psychiatrists do. That's not what I do as a psychologist. I do behavioral intervention, and Jessie, same thing. But our psychiatrists actually have great research-based medication interventions that can be used in conjunction with therapy. And so sometimes what happens is when Jessie and I kind of notice, like, you know, we're not really getting where we should be getting with therapy alone, then we work with a great team of psychiatrists, not that work in our office, but that we partner with and we collaborate with all the time. And then we will refer to one of them who then can evaluate and see if medication would also be helpful in the situation. So that's kind of how that works. Now, what I will say, just kind of a word of caution, I think doing medication in some circumstances people feel like is easier. I think for kids and adolescents, I would never recommend doing medication alone. There's two problems with it. One, they don't develop the skills or tools that they need because they don't have those. Otherwise, they would be using them and they would probably not be as anxious. So that's problem one. Problem two is then it teaches them, right, that they have to have something outside of themselves to help themselves. And so then there's this sort of just like, I can't really help myself. They're internally. And that's just not a message that you want to send to kids and adolescents. I don't find that that's a majority of parents, but I think that that can happen. The child and adolescent psychiatrists we work with are really great about when they're prescribing medication. They'll also, if a parent hasn't gotten a therapy referral, they'll make sure that happens too. Jessie, what else would you add to that?
I think an important thing is also, you guys probably noticed she said child and adolescent psychiatrists. And so that's going to be different than a pediatrician. And the reason why, like, we love pediatricians, they do so many great things, but with these medications, they're so specialized and these kids are growing and changing so quickly. You want somebody who knows the ins and outs and does this all day long, knows these medicines, knows these kids. And that's all they're paying attention to. So they're not also dealing with strep throat and all these other things. They'll obviously, a good psychiatrist will work with the pediatrician and make sure they have a lot of communication as well as working with us. But that's going to be a really important thing too, especially for some of these kids who have longer term needs for medication, things like that. You want somebody who really knows what they're looking for with each of these medications.
Jessie, excellent point. And I also put out there, I wouldn't also have a neurologist manage it. I sometimes I think parents, that also seems gentler than a psychiatrist, but we work with some really awesome ones. And really what they are, right, is also a different type of brain doctor that's not looking at seizure activity maybe, but is really looking at these social emotional concerns. So again, neurologists, most of them do not manage those kind of medications because of the way they're set up. They can't really monitor that as well. And part of this is you really want these medications to be monitored closely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and the bottom line is you don't want to go it alone, and having a trusted team of professionals that are, eyes outside of yourself to help keep an eye on your child is really important. And trusting another professional to really help you, guide you as you help your child, as it's not an easy thing to make a decision to get help or to ever medicate. So I do have another question that's come up. There's a parent that says they're concerned about ADHD high schooler not being motivated in college as no reward from the parent. Should I just continue virtual meetings with psychologists? Should I ask if she's getting things done? So
this sounds like to me, this is a college student. Parent has some concerns because this person has ADHD and they're in college, and how's that going? I have a couple of things that I'll just kind of throw out there. One is making sure that they're in the right major, because kids with ADHD do really awesome, hit it out of the ballpark if they're interested in what they're doing or studying, which every parent with a child with ADHD is like, yes, they can play that video game for 5 hours. They can read about some, interests they have. Like my niece has ADHD and she read about like home construction in England, and knew all these facts about it, right? Because she was interested in it. So a big part is capturing that interest. And I think that's really important for a college student. And then also are they able to get their medication in college? I know that sounds really basic, but I help college students all the time problem solve how to get their medication.
Wow.
Thirdly, yeah, because they're kind of just learning how to do that, right? Really. Thirdly, it's also if college, the class times are different. So is their medication working well, for when their classes are, and how are they taking it? And so checking in with their psychiatrist about that, I think can be super helpful. Because I just have kids who will have a 8 a.m. class and then like a 7 p.m. class. And then they're trying to figure out that ADHD medication, which is really hard. To that mom's point, she said she was working. It sounds like the child's working with a psychologist. So I think one of the things you can do is just say, hey, could we all set up a meeting to kind of just talk about how things are going? That's kind of more, I wouldn't be like texting my kiddo, hey, have you turned in your term paper? Have you studied for your test? You're kind of beyond that at that point. But it might be a nice time to just have a meeting with the team and just like, hey, where are we? How are things going?
Yeah, I've heard of the idea of having a team meeting of, all the folks involved and, kind of like you would do for business. And if you've got a kid in college, maybe you could, present it in that way. This is a very adult thing. These are all the people that care about you. We're all working together and that sort of thing. And then also, a lot of kids don't want to do those 8 a.m. classes. So avoiding those 8 a.m. classes might be ideal because they may not be getting up for those. And managing sleep and the schedule is all very, very hard and very new when you don't have your parents doing all of that. But it's a great time to grow up. So I think going away to college is such a cool thing. But it is a lot to manage, and especially now with COVID. So
yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. And kind of really, I find with those students, it's really maybe problem solving what isn't working. Right. And that's where that team meeting comes in. And I think for parents, and I'd say this to all parents, college is so expensive these days. And so I think really laying out clear expectations about if you're paying for it, what are the expectations on how they're doing, right?
Yeah.
And I think laying those out from the start, not kind of like midway through the semester and then kind of like threatening funding, that doesn't usually go well. But just, hey, let's have a meeting. Because what I tell parents is you're making an investment and you would never, most people don't make blind investments. They say, hey, can you give me some facts? Can you give me some data on my investment, right? If I'm going to invest this much money. So if you're going to invest $100,000, $200,000 in college, you're just saying, hey, we need to look at how we're going to manage this investment.
So how often though, I think this is something that a lot of moms would be wondering, how often would a mom or dad be maybe texting their student at college to ask if they're getting things done? Is that something that they should be doing? And if so, I know we talked about the meeting, but in addition to the meeting, should they be able to reach out? And what's the appropriate level of contact? It's hard.
It is really hard because all of these kids are also really individual. And so you talked about you've got multiple kids. And so there's probably one even when they're still at home that you've got to be on every single day, ask all the questions. There's one who you check in every week, and that's just enough. Like everybody has their own rhythm. So it is a little bit tough.
Yeah.
But I think, college has turned into the stepping stone to being just really on your own. And so with a lot of these kids, it is giving a little bit of rope, letting them take a little bit of space. And it's hard to say exactly how often that is because some kids may need you to be on them every single day at the very beginning of college just because this is a whole new thing. And that may be how they're motivated. I, to this day, have friends who talk to their parents every single day on the phone. And then some kids maybe can do a little bit more, or they need to see that they have to do stuff because college is different than their high school was. No one's reminding them of things. And so I think a lot of times just even asking, because you will talk to your kids. Hey, how are things going? How do you think things are going? What do you think would make things go better? Questions are going to be really key in a lot of that because your college student does not want to be told what to do. But oftentimes you can get there with the questions and find out, what do they see as a problem? What do they see as some solutions? What do they need from you to be more successful? I think those could be really helpful conversations to have. But the frequency is tricky.
And I would say conversation, and I think you agree on that beforehand. Hey, let's talk about this. How does a weekly check-in sound? Right? So that we're not in this crisis situation. And now as mom, I'm really worried about you failing out. And so now I'm texting you every day and kind of badgering you because that's not working well. And it's not helping them build that skill of how to manage themselves while being away from home.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. It's a tough time. I'm not there yet, but I'm already freaked out. So as always, I'm trying to build as much knowledge as I can as I'm going down the pike here. But well, I think right now that concludes all of the questions that we have. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to share with us before we sign off?
Just like kind of quickly, Sparrow House Counseling, we've got a website with resources. We have an Instagram. And Jessie, we have stuff on Facebook as well. Jessie does a lot of our social media stuff. She's our guru on that. But we just have a lot of resources. We're truly a practice that just has a heart to really serve and support our community to help build healthy families, right? Because we know healthy families build healthy children and adolescents and then into adulthood. So that's kind of our passion. And we're happy to be a resource, even if somebody's not even walking in our doors.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate both of you taking the time out of your very busy schedules to be here tonight to share your information and answer questions. So can't thank you enough. And we look forward to working with you again in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Y'all have a great night. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.